Dan Diaz.
Thank you. Mr. Diaz, there's 1 minute left in the 15 minutes total.
Good afternoon. My name is Dan Diaz, and I'm Brittany Menard's husband. Last year, Brittany and I had to move to Oregon so that she could access medical aid in dying in order to secure a gentle passing if it were to become necessary for her. She died peacefully in her sleep on November 1st of last year. In January, the end-of-life option legislation was introduced here in California, and I stood next to Jennifer Glass at the press conference as she explained to everyone the lung cancer that she was battling. Jennifer died 3 weeks ago today, on August 11th. On that Tuesday morning, I went to visit her and her husband, Harlan. I sat at her bedside, and I saw a person who was withering away. She had been placed into terminal sedation 5 days before. The pain that Jennifer was experiencing had now spread to her brain and had become unbearable, so it's her request. In terminal sedation, it took 5 days for her to pass away. My wife, Brittany, passed away gently. Jennifer's death was not as gentle. In either case, it was the individual determining that it was their time. And in either case, the result was the same, death. But the manner of getting there was quite different. Shouldn't the individual have the option for which they would choose for themselves? It's disturbing to hear people judge those of us who would want the option to have a gentle and peaceful dying process. There are certain diseases that produce horrific effects. There's no glory in suffering a prolonged and agonizing death if that's not what the individual wants. With 7 out of 10 Californians agreeing with Brittany and with Jennifer that a terminally ill individual should have access to aid in dying medication in order to secure a gentle passing if necessary, I urge this committee to listen to the people of California. Thank you.
Thank you. Just so it's clear, the total amount of time used was 16 minutes and 6 seconds. We're going to give the exact same amount of time to the other side for fairness. And at this point, we can entertain questions or clarifying questions, comments, concerns for this panel from members. Dr. Wood, and then Ms. Bonilla.
Yes, and first of all, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being here, and thank you for, quite frankly, tackling this really difficult subject. I'd just like to say, from my own heart here, one of the things that has happened, some of the people who are not in favor of moving this forward are kind of uncomfortable with the process in that we are in a special session now to deal with Medi-Cal funding and developmental disabilities, and that this is maybe not the place for that, and that this is maybe a distraction. And I just want to acknowledge that's what is happening. But having said that, I'm concerned about the rumors of an initiative that might come forward from this, and I think personally it's our responsibility to address this issue as a legislative body to give people a real option to make a rational decision. So I do have questions about some of the things in the bill that have changed a little bit. That's appropriate, Mr. Chair.
That is appropriate.
There is language in the bill that was not in the previous bill. I'm sure you've heard discussion about it, in particular on page 9. I can read that language to you if you wish. So it says specifically, the information shall not be, this is on page 19, line 10 beginning, the information shall not be disclosed, discoverable, or compelled to be produced in any civil, criminal, administrative, or other proceeding. And so I'd like to know can you explain what you're intending to accomplish by doing this?
That was an article that was in the Sacramento Bee that they have since printed a correction that was taken out of context and sent as a standalone rather than as an entire package. That section refers only to the public records, or to the information that goes to public health for data storing. That's the same standard that is used for people with HIV, Hep C, anything else that we are collecting data as a state about to keep. The medical record that contains all of the data and information is still, it's protected by HIPAA, but it is still discoverable in any court.
Okay. And then a second question. I know there have been many conversations that resulted in various amendments to the bill attempting to provide some safeguards. And I thank all of the authors and the staffs for working through that. It's got to be really difficult, the meetings and negotiations go along with that. So actually, I'm going to save this question for the opponents. Actually, my apologies on that. But I just want to say thank you again for your work on this.
Thank you, Dr. Wood. Ms. Bonilla.
Thank you. I want to thank those who gave testimony today. Thank you for being here and for sharing your stories. That's very important. And yes, we do need you all the time to come and share your perspective with us, particularly here in the Assembly where we didn't have the benefit of the Senate hearings. So I do appreciate you making the sacrifice and the effort to be here. I do have some questions of the author around the bill that have been raised to me, and I want to raise them so we can just have an open discussion about them. One was the definition of a terminal condition, terminal without treatment, and whether that was going to open the door around some chronic conditions, whether there was going to be enough protection in the bill to say, this is truly the terminal patient. It isn't the patient with diabetes who, if they didn't take their medicine, then might become eligible. Can you just give some reassurance on that issue?
Sure. This very clearly is not for someone with a chronic condition. It's somebody with a terminal condition. And this is the exact same criteria that we use for hospice care. It is similar as it was in Oregon as it is here. That's the criteria for hospice care. You have a terminal diagnosis, prognosis, which no cure is expected. So that is not something that you would give a diagnosis of for somebody just with diabetes. Although I will say end-stage diabetes can often be a terminal diagnosis, especially if it results in a lot of kidney loss or limb loss or chronic gangrene. So, but a chronic condition on its own is not eligible under this act.
Mm-hmm. Another concern that was raised was around the issue of whether the self-administration is mandatory. And this, again, kind of comes from the fear of would somebody else in the privacy of a home perhaps be coercive and or administer it? Is the language in the bill clear on the issue of that it must be administered, self-administered?
We think so. I mean, we have stated in the bill that it is a felony for anyone to give this drug to somebody. That is part of it, that somebody has to be cognitively and physically able to ingest it upon their own. I will say we are working with Ms. Baker right now on an amendment that we are going to take that says that she would like one more time in the last 48 hours before someone's death to be able to sign something that said, I'm still on board and I'm still taking this on my own. Mm-hmm. So that perhaps will resolve that issue as well.
Thank you. And then were also concerns raised about the potential perhaps to steer patients through using coverage incentives towards this option. What do you feel is in the bill that protects patients, whether they're in a health plan or perhaps on a Medi-Cal plan, from feeling that there's a pressure on them to perhaps take this option as cost saving or some other incentive that would be there?
Well, it's also stated in the bill that it's against the law to push anybody in this for financial reasons. And again, we have almost 2 decades of research from Oregon that says this has not been a problem. There's not been one suit brought forward. And in fact, patients who are on Medi-Cal would probably not even be eligible for this simply because at this point Medi-Cal doesn't provide the prescription. So somebody would have to come up with, at this point it's still about $1,200 to be able to take it. So this idea that poor people are going to be pushed into it, there's really no basis in reality for that, both on data as well as the protections in the bill, as well as what medical coverage exists for very low-income people right now in the state of California.
Mm-hmm. And then just one final clarification on the issue of undue influence over a patient. There was raised to me as a concern that the language in the bill was too vague to enforce. How would you ever know if there really was undue influence? And how can we protect, or do you feel within the bill those protections are in place to really protect the patient?
We feel that there are protections in the bill. We feel like that's why we've been able to reach a neutral position, both with the Hospital Association as well as with the CMA. The legal field has been able to look at this. We have met with every group, I think, but imaginable. Senator Wolk and Monning and myself, and now with our new joint authors. We have tried to close every door possible for somebody to point to that. Does anybody get coerced into, going for a cup of coffee when they don't want to? I don't know. I mean, some things, there's just no way to stop. But in this bill, it is a felony to coerce somebody. When you meet with your doctor initially, hopefully that's somebody you have a relationship with. They must meet with you alone. Not with a witness in the room, but meet with you alone as well. You have to see another physician alone. You have to put it in writing. It has to be witnessed by a healthcare provider, potentially somebody who works in that office, and somebody else. So we feel like we have done everything we can besides state 2 or 3 times within the bill it is a felony to coerce somebody.
Thank you very much for answering the questions. Thank you.
May I address the first part of her question?
Yes.
And George Will, I'm not fond of quoting him, but he said, today's culture of casual death should deepen worries about a slippery slope from physician-assisted dying to a further diminution of life sanctity. And this is what caused the San Jose Mercury to quote that he's in favor, or he's warning about slippery slope. But the next phrase, he says, life, however, is inevitably lived on multiple slippery slopes. Taxation could become confiscation. Police could become instruments of oppression. Public education could become indoctrination, etc. Everywhere and always, civilization depends on the drawing of intelligent distinctions. I think this body has the intelligence to draw those distinctions.
Thank you. Ms. Baker?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Assemblymember Eggman, for your work on this, and the witnesses for sharing their very personal story. I found it extremely compelling. I have talked to every constituent that was interested in speaking on this issue, including Mr. Diaz, early in this year, both for and against the bill, as well as faith leaders from just about every faith I could think of in my community as late as this morning to ask on this issue. And I've shared that with you because I have concerns. I've had concerns about the bill from the beginning, and I appreciate that you and Senators Monning and Wolk have been very willing to discuss them. I was struck in my conversations with constituents by a couple of things. I was certainly struck by the compelling stories that many tell. I had a town hall in Moraga just this Saturday where many people came up to me and said, I watched my spouse die miserably within the last week or two. And those who felt very strongly that this was a diminution of life, that is a slippery slope we cannot go on. But when I received a letter from a Tiffany Miller of Walnut Creek in my district, whose grandmother was a World War II WASP veteran, and she had died very painfully, slowly from cancer, and her sister's dog had been put very peacefully asleep, as we often see, and she wrote to me, I do not understand why my grandmother could not have had access to the same options as my sister's dog. And certainly knowing that human life is far above most valuable creation that God has. At least that's my belief as a Christian. So I found these compelling points. In speaking with faith leaders, I was struck by something that I heard many of them say, which is, even the ones who strongly oppose this bill, that they see when they're at bedside so often, someone tell the family, this is what you do. Let me just tell you that I'm going to say take 1 pill, but you really want to take 2. And that we don't know how under the table this is right now, that this bill has the possibility of at least getting us in a more regulated world so that we can see if this is something we want to have happen in California. I was very compelled by that from faith leaders, that having that option still allows me, as a Christian with whatever beliefs I have, or anyone else who may vehemently oppose someone taking it, to still try to change their mind. And that there is the possibility this will become an initiative. If we don't engage in this conversation, that we have little ability to control. So that's where I've gotten more comfortable with this bill. The one area that I've said time and again is an issue is one where I just want to have a bit of a short colloquy with you on the amendments. And that is, I felt from my law practice, and from colleagues who practice elder abuse, so many instances where the families are fighting over the estate and what to do. You know, Brittany had family around her who wanted her to live. Not everybody is in that situation. And so I felt there were inadequate protections in the bill for once the prescription is obtained and the person's at home to keep someone from slipping it to them, either because they have their own stresses in life or they want to make that decision for them. So we've been talking about how to protect against that. One is, and I just want to memorialize it, an agreement that it is a felony to coerce or unduly influence someone not only to obtain the prescription but to ingest it. That's correct. I know we don't have language yet from Ledge Council, but that is something that we are working on and will have. The second is that it is a felony to give it to the individual without their knowing. So I appreciate that you are agreeing to those amendments. And as you referred to recently, within 48 hours prior to taking, self-administering the prescription, that the person attests again in writing that they are knowingly doing it. And if the person does pass away and the medicine is not returned, they better have that form to show that this was with consent. So I'm seeing your head nod that is also one that we have the draft language and I know we're working on, but I feel are imperative. So that's a bit of a monologue, and I'm sorry for that, but I wanted to get your additional affirmation that these will go into the bill, because they are essential to maintain consent on this. For the benefit of all my colleagues, I wanted them to know that those are amendments that are important to have. So I thank you for your work on this, and I guess it was more of a comment and colloquy than a question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Baker. Any other members at this time wish to ask questions? Mr. Garcia.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Assemblymember Baker, for bringing forward those amendments to add some additional safeguards. A question for our faith-based leader. I've been struggling with this issue quite a bit. I have a significant amount of constituents who have reached out to our office, predominantly Latino, Catholic, and the moral arguments that are being made that we all know that we cannot legislate, moral policy here. I mean, people are going to believe one thing, and you're going to be on the right or the wrong side either way, right? And there are a number of issues that come before us here in the legislature. We've heard people as far as going as far as questioning or challenging our own beliefs. And I'll be the first. I'm born Catholic, practicing Catholic, and I'm struggling with this, but after hearing a number of witnesses come in and that are asking for the option to be available, it's not something that we are forcing people to do. And it sounds to me that many of those safeguards are in place. But I wanted to get your take and give us a perspective on some of the moral arguments that are being made for and or against this bill. And you sitting there with the caller, I think can help me, us, and those watching just understand a little more about that perspective that's being put forward.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to address the issues that you are asking me to look into. I have been a strong supporter of these kinds of bills even before the Oregon bill was available. I did receive actually an international prize in Toronto many years ago for advocating for these kinds of solutions. And this has come because of my work as a pastor. When you show that beautiful photograph of your mother, you and your mother holding hands, I thought about how privileged I am to be allowed into the holy of holies of those moments. And as a pastor, I have been in innumerable sacred places of the transition from life as we know it to life as it is promised to us as people of faith. So I have seen it in a great variety of ways, but the one decade of my life that definitely cemented my attitude was the decade when AIDS came into the picture. I was a pastor at Hollywood United Methodist Church, and we had weekly funerals because nobody else in the community was willing to do funerals for people who were dying of AIDS because the majority of them at that time were gay people. And so I had already spoken about my personal feelings about the fact that all persons are daughters and sons of God, and they deserve the best possible treatment that we as people of faith can give them. So when that was well known, then we were approached to provide a place for the last rituals. And in some instances, I was permitted into that Holy of Holies where these folks who were pretty wealthy, the West Hollywood crowd that got hit the hardest at the beginning, they were pretty wealthy, and they knew how to secure the wherewithal to, they didn't need to come before this committee and ask for laws. They went ahead and did it. And there were veritable farewell parties, and then a smaller group of people would gather into a smaller room, and the embraces, the cries, the tears, and all that would be given at that time. So this cemented my conviction that we needed to be far more humane towards one another as we confront our own finitude. To me, what I'm saying to you will sound hollow, and in some ways it ought to. But I hope that you will really pay attention to the words that came filtered through choked tears of anticipation or of remembrance. Those are the words you need to be paying attention to. And in terms of my Christian faith, I believe that Jesus, I'm a Christian, but Jesus was Jewish. And in the Jewish tradition, the prophetic tradition of Judaism already had begun to move from the Lord of hosts, the warrior God, to the compassionate parent. And so by the time of Jesus, Jesus dares to say God is Abba. He doesn't say Father. That's a betrayal of Jesus' words. He uses the words of balbuceo, we say in Spanish, baby talk, to refer to God. And so you can say Papa, Papacito, Daddy to God. That kind of intimacy that Jesus introduced about us and the Creator of the universe demands that we be gentle and kind to one another, especially at the moment of death. I had the difficult situation in Pacific Palisades, the wealthiest church in my denomination in Southern California. And the daughter of a very famous woman, whose name I cannot say here right now, looked into her mother's eyes and said, "We have treated our pets better than you're treating me." Ladies and gentlemen, in the name of God, do what is right. This is a Kairos moment. This is what God is calling you to do.
Additional comments or questions from members? Okay, thank you to this panel very much for your insight and contributions. We will next bring up the opposition panel, which will have 16 minutes and 6 seconds to split among the witnesses testifying.
Ms. O'Donnell feels bad about going so long. I told her, do not worry about it. One moment. Her story is important. She gets the last word.
And just little preview to where we're headed after this. We're next going to have public comment from those in support of the bill, and we'd like to ask those in wheelchairs or who need additional assistance to provide your statement of support first, and then after that we're going to go to public comment from those in opposition. So this panel we can commence in the order that you see fit. 16 minutes, 6 seconds. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll try to just take 6 seconds. My name is David Ford. I'm the lobbyist for the Association of Northern California Oncologists, the Medical Oncology Association of Southern California, both of whom are in opposition to the bill. But I'm sitting here for the moment just to introduce the coalition. Sitting to my right is Dr. Laura Petrillo, a palliative care and hospice physician. To my left over here in the wheelchair is Marilyn Golden with the Disability Rights Education and Defense Fund. And then to her left is Dolores Tejada from an independent living center. And with that, I'll cede my time to them.
Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Laura Petrillo, and I'm a palliative care and hospice medicine physician in San Francisco. Members of the Assembly, thank you for taking time to hear from a varied set of voices on this issue. This is a subject of enormous public health importance that affects every Californian, and we need to get it right. I'm here to urge you to vote no on ABX 215 because there are insufficient safeguards to keep Californians safe. As a physician who deals with end-of-life issues routinely and sees patients young and old who are dealing with terminal illnesses like cancer, heart failure, and ALS, I'm very familiar with the difficult choices that patients are faced with at the end of life and the struggles they can have with physical and existential suffering. I chose to pursue specialized training in palliative care to learn how to help patients and families deal with that suffering, and because I think that it is one of the single biggest areas in need of improvement in our healthcare system. I am a liberal voter and an atheist, and my views are motivated purely by my professional concern about how the most vulnerable Californians would be affected by this bill. Many healthcare providers share my view, and I'm here to represent them too. I'm concerned about how older adults, particularly adults with dementia, will be protected under this bill. One of the key elements of any assisted suicide program should be making sure that people are acting independently, making decisions with sound judgment. This assessment can be very difficult in patients with dementia or cognitive impairment, and that murkiness leaves people with cognitive impairment open to risk of coercion from their families, care providers, or even the medical system. Moreover, it is very common for people to lose decision-making capacity at the end of their lives. In one study, 70% of people lost that capacity, and they were unable to make decisions for themselves in their final days. So even if a person asks for lethal medication when she is still lucid, there's no oversight to ensure that the patient herself remains in control. And I hear you about these amendments that are being proposed, and I still think we have insufficient safeguards, and I'll tell you why. People with psychiatric illness are also at risk. The medical community in the U.S. is united in feeling that depressed individuals should be kept safe when they express a wish to end their lives and given mental health treatment. We feel so strongly about this that we commonly hold people in the hospital against their will to keep them safe when they express a wish to end their lives. ABX 215 would create a very different reality for patients in whom mental illness overlaps with terminal illness. The bill only suggests but does not require a mental health evaluation, and patients can easily change doctors until they find a willing prescriber. Even though one study found that 26% of people who requested assisted suicide in Oregon were depressed over the last 10 years, only 3% of people who asked for assisted suicide have actually been referred for mental health evaluation, let alone given treatment. And there's the same language in the Oregon bill recommending that referral, but it just simply does not happen. In addition, making assisted suicide legal affects all individuals, terminally ill or not, who are contemplating suicide by sending the message that it is acceptable to actively end life when it is no longer of value or when suffering is too great. One woman, Ellen of Lincoln, California, who is depressed but not terminally ill, said that if assisted suicide became legal, it would give me a green light that it's okay to end my life. In Oregon and Washington, the rate of suicide among the non-terminally ill has dramatically increased since assisted suicide became legal, suggestive of suicide contagion. We already have inadequate mental health care and too much suicide in California, and we can't afford to make the problem worse. Finally, I have a tremendous amount of faith in the power of palliative care to relieve suffering. but not everyone has access to it, and not every doctor knows how to practice it or when to refer their patients for help. I've had many patients come to me and say, "Doctor, this pain is so bad, I'm so miserable, I want to die." But when we treat their pain, that feeling of total desperation goes away, and they're able to spend more time with their families. If assisted suicide were legal, doctors who do not have that specialized training in palliative medicine could easily give lethal medication at that first request, rather than trying to find ways to help patients when they come to them with a cry for help. Palliative care and hospice medicine are already underutilized because people don't trust the healthcare system and because they don't know that it is possible to regain control and find relief. But assisted suicide does not fix this problem. It deepens mistrust, puts vulnerable patients at risk, and prevents us from talking about what we really need: hospice reform and getting more people access to the best possible care all throughout life. Please hear my concerns for my patients and all of our loved ones and vote no on AB X 215. Thank you.